It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and thanks for the invitation to come and talk to you about something that I feel is a small revolution in its own self, and I'll explain why. Let's get started, and then when you're tired and fed up, you just start showing me by a signs of hands, enough, enough, we want to eat, whatever you want to say, okay? So, let's start with who I am, because it's always good to be acquainted, right? So you heard a lot of nice things, and thank you very much for the introduction. Most of it is irrelevant. What is important, and I want to draw your attention on, is UNDP. Right? So UNDP, UN, United Nations, DP Development Program. So what basically we do is that we are all around the world in about 130 different countries. We have offices and people like me. And what we do is that we provide technical assistance for the country, mostly with the government, to help them become a better country for the good of the people. Right? So there are many ways of doing this, and as you may agree, the best way for a big organization to move forward is that every member of that organization share the same objective. Because if you try to go different places, it becomes a bit of a mess, right? So in the year 2000, 17 years ago, in the UN, for the first time in the history of mankind, we were able to achieve a fantastic consensus around 7 amazing goals. And they were called the Millennium, because we were in 2000, the Millennium Development Goals. Right? So what they were is quite interesting. There was the idea that if we could have all the member states of the UN, that includes Nepal, agree on 7 big objectives, right? We would make good progress, because then all the countries would go towards the same direction. Right? So we had a group of technical people, experts. We locked them up in a room, and we said to them, come up with a few objectives that you think everybody will agree. So they did this. It took, took several months. But ultimately, by 2001, 2002, we had the Millennium Development Goals, which are about health, education, clean environment, good quality water to drink. I mean, all those mostly social elements that I think everybody that lives on our planet actually wants to achieve for themselves, for their families, for their communities. So we put this at the General Assembly of the UN. And of course, it was very difficult for any country to say, no, I'm against good education. No, I'm against providing food to everybody. No, I'm against to have a clean environment. So in a way, we were successful in striking a deal where all member states of the UN agreed on those Millennium Development Goals. And then we said, okay, now go. It was approved, and all the countries started working on the goals. And UNDP, we were asked to, in all our country offices, help the countries understand what they are and help the countries report against the progress behind the MDGs. Right, so fast forward, we are in 2015. Right? 15 years we gave the countries to achieve the MDGs. And more or less, they were all achieved. Right? So very big success of the international community, of all the member states. And obviously, a shining example that when we have a common agenda, we are able to move forward together. So then the big question came, so what's next? What are we going to do now? Right? And a few lessons were drawn from this MDG process. The first lesson was that the easier the goals are, the maximum the chances are that we are going to reach consensus, right? Because it's difficult, again, to be against those big issues. But another big lesson was that if you only ask a group of experts, the level of ownership that's behind the goals is quite low. Right? So the idea was that how can we make sure that the next set of goals are, 1, more ambitious, and 2, are really owned by the country. Right? So roughly in 2013, the UN started a huge global campaign called My World. Right? And My World was an attempt to use new technologies, mostly social media, to consult every single citizen of the planet and ask those people, what would you want to see achieve in the next 15 years? Right? So imagine it was a huge, huge, huge survey based on Facebook, based on Twitter, on internet, everywhere. We mobilized not only the countries, but also within the countries, civil society, religious leaders, business leaders, civil society leaders, academe, schools, everybody was invited to take part in that survey. Right? And it was over 1-2 years. We had millions of response, and then we narrow it down. And what you see here is the result of that survey. Of course, it was validated by the member states of the UN, but a very interesting lesson was that some of the topics that were not in the MDGs, because at the time people thought if we're going to start to put more politically charged issues, some countries are not going to be very happy. Right? So, for example, let's take goal number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Basically the governance agenda. Right? So I think everybody will agree that without good governance, it's very difficult to manage a country, manage anything, right? But I think we all also agree that the definition of a concept like, let's take an easy one, democracy, is going to be very different from one country to the next. Right? Who agrees that France, my country, is a democracy? Who agrees to that statement? I'm telling you, France is a democracy. You agree or you disagree? You agree. Okay, thank you. That was close. Nepal is a democracy. Who agrees? Come on, what's happening tomorrow? People vote, no? Thank you. Right? So it's maybe not quite as a democracy as France, but it is going there. Zimbabwe, Cuba, North Korea, China, Somalia, Iraq, right? All those countries, right? So how do we, again, going back to the idea of a common agenda, manage to come up with ideas, concept that member states have to have consensus on? Very difficult. And maybe an even more difficult one, 13, climate change, right? So you have a country, again, let's take mine, for example, well-developed, plenty of industries, polluting freely, right? But producing, creating jobs, creating growth, creating richness. But at the same time, spending a lot of money on anti-pollution devices. Right? But then you have another country, let's not take Nepal because it's not a very big industrious country, but let's take another, I don't know, let's take Vietnam, right? Which has a stronger industrial base than Nepal. Quite a lot of factories there. Right? So of course they're not at the same level of development as France. And now you want to tell them, no, 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 you're not supposed to pollute. Well, it's very easy for my country to tell them because we've done most of our industrial development. But they are in the middle of it. So why should they feel obliged to limit their emission of pollution just because France wants to feel good and can now focus because it has created the jobs, it has created the growth, it has created the richness that Vietnam is aspiring to. Right? Which leads to the concept of what we call common but differentiated responsibility. Right? Meaning it's a common responsibility to reduce pollution and fight climate change, but you have to have a differentiated approach because different countries are at different stage of development. Right? And so by using this type of discussion within the UN, we went against all odds, and to the surprise of everybody, the enthusiasm of the success of the MDGs, we had a major breakthrough in September of 2015 with the adoption unanimously of the Sustainable Development Goals. All right, so that's one of the first key messages that I want you to remember, that this is a major achievement of the global community. Now, Nepal is one of them. All right, so you should really feel that this belongs to you. Okay? Second big message. What does Nepal have to do with all this? Right? Very importantly, the SDGs, sometimes people tell me, oh, you and your SDGs. Oh, the UN and their SDGs. I said, no, that's a misconception. We are only facilitators. Who was behind this? If you paid attention to what I said, is two groups of people. The global community, people who have voted in the My World survey saying, yes, decent work is important. Yes, responsible consumption is important. Yes, and we go back to the MDGs, education, health, gender, all those were already part of the MDGs, right? But we've added more complicated ones. So this is a list of 17 issues that people really felt strongly about. So it's an agenda of the people. And of course, the second big group are the countries, right? So it's the member states of the UN who've approved this, not UN civil servants like me. We only facilitated that process, right? So it's not my SDGs, or maybe it is as much my SDGs as it is your SDG, or your SDG, or your SDG, right? So it's very important that, first of all, we take ownership of this agenda. Now, why should we take ownership, you might ask? Well, don't you agree that these are important objectives? Is anybody in this room disagreeing with reducing inequalities? With addressing climate change, with promoting and achieving decent work for all? These are really values that are at the core of humanity. And you can take them as individuals. You all want this, as yourself. I'm sure you all want this for your family. But then there are also very important objectives, especially towards the latter ones, 13, 16, 17, even 15, right? Which are not only important for us as individuals, but they are important to address as people living and sharing the same pot, right? So ownership is critical. That's the second message. The third message, I'm going to give you a little mystery here. And we're going to play a game. Why don't we do that? The third one, I'm going to ask you to think of 5 words, all starting with the same letter, the letter P, which is the basis of all this.
Peace.
Okay, hold on. Peace is a good one. And that's a 1 point for the madam there, all right? Poverty is interesting, but we try in the UN to always be positive, right? So we don't talk about poverty. We talk about poverty reduction, right? Huh?
Prosperity.
Very good. All right, that's another one. Prosperity. So we have peace and prosperity. It's interesting because these are usually the difficult ones to come out. So we need 3 more. Population. Okay, you're almost there. That's the idea. But we don't talk about population. We talk about people. Right? Oh, problem? We never have problem. We only have solutions. What school are you in? Right? Progress is a concept. I agree, but that's not part of the peace. All right. Where do we live? Thank you. Planet, okay? So now you have the 4 key ingredients. We the people, right? This is the beginning of the UN. It's we the people. So we have people. They live on the planet. They, of course, want prosperity. To get prosperity, we need peace. But what also a key fundamental that we need to make all this work? Yeah, almost there. Partnerships. Right? We need to all be partners because we only have one planet with its own resources and we need to share it. Right? We're really, if you want, the backbone of the thinking behind the 17 goals. Right? So the 5 P's, if you wish, represent the process, another P, that we followed, right? And that gave birth to those 17 beautiful goals. Okay? Okay, now moving on, what's happening in Nepal against those? Right? So I'm going to talk to you about 2 levels. What we, the UN, do, and where we would want you to be associated with some of it. And then I will tell you what the government does. And not only the government, but other institutions within the country. Right? And then you can see how you can also position yourself as private citizens of Nepal vis-a-vis this. Right? So first, what the UN does. The UN does 3 things. Now, UNDP is only one of the many UN agencies in the country. Right? What are the other UN agencies that you know of? UNICEF, okay, yeah. WHO. Nah, that's not the UN. That's a big international NGO, but it's not the UN. UNHCR, UNESCO, UNEP, UNFPA. I mean, there's, I think in country we are about 18, but there's many more that are not physically in Nepal, but also work in Nepal, right? So all those UN agencies get together, and we do 3 things around the SDGs. First, we do what I do today, which is communicate, exchange, explain, inform, raise awareness, mobilize, right? Why? Because of the ownership aspect. We want this to be really your own agenda. Right? So that's the first thing we do. The second thing is very much our bread and butter, if I can say that. It's providing technical assistance through our different projects around the country to help Nepal achieve those goals. So my UNICEF and UNESCO colleagues, they work with the Ministry of Education to improve education. WHO is going to work with the Ministry of Health to improve health. I'm going to work with the Ministry of Environment, National Planning Commission to work on clean climate, etc., etc. Right? That's the second big thing we do. And the third thing, just like we did under the MDGs, we monitor and we report. Right? So behind all those goals, you have targets, 169 of them, and each target, of course, you have indicators, and you monitor the situation. Right? You agree with the government on what indicators they want to use, and then you move on. Every year you measure. From that measurement, you draw a report. From the report, you do policy recommendation, and you go to the government and say, you have to change this, you have to change that, etc., so that we achieve this by 2030, another 15 years. Okay? So these are the three things that we do. Inform, help achieve, and monitor and report. That's the role of the UN. Now, what has the government done since the adoption of this to really show that they are buying it and moving forward? Right? Now, you should know the custodian of this in the government structure is the National Planning Commission. So the first thing they did is that they made sure that the plan they have for Nepal, it's called the 3-year, what's it called? The 3-year development plan, I think, right? Is it 5 years? Okay, anyway, you know better. So they made sure that this plan is fully aligned to those objectives. Right? It has to be obviously aligned, otherwise you're going in different directions. Right? So that's the first thing they did. Once the plan is set, well, that's the plan that they control, which is the national plan. But then we need to push it down towards the districts, towards the provinces that are yet to come, towards the municipalities which are slowly appearing. Right? So we need to, as soon as we have mayors elected in different municipalities, we need to make sure that the municipal plans of Kathmandu, of Lalitpur, of all those places also align, with this. So the planning is very important. If you have a plan, what do you next need to implement the plan? What do you need? Sorry? Budget. Exactly. Right? You need the money to fuel the implementation of the plan. Right? So the Ministry of Finance is coming up with a budget and tagging each line of the national budget to one of the goals. Right? So saying this line with this amount of million of rupees is going to contribute to goal 12, let's say. Right? So you tag the different budget. Right? But in order for the budget to be efficient and really achieve this, you need more than tagging. What you need is like, when you want to buy something, you need to know how much it costs, right? And to see if you can afford it. So what the government is right now, as we speak, working on is the budget tag of this. How much is it going to cost Nepal to achieve those 17 goals? That's a big question. Right, so how do we do that? Well, again, we go back to the 169 indicators. Right? Let's say, let's say an easy example, school, education, right? We have today an enrollment ratio, let's say in universities of, I'm going to say a random number because I forgot the statistics, but let's say 40% of young people of the age of going to university are enrolled in university, right? We want to reach by 2030, 60%, right? So how much will it take to invest in creating universities, printing textbooks, recruiting teachers, moving people, giving scholarships, all this has a cost. So you add all this up and you have what it will cost for Nepal to achieve that objective. You do this across the 169. So imagine the work that's behind this, right? It's huge amounts of work. Right? But at the end of the day, plus, computer, boom, a big number. It's probably trillions of rupees anyway, right? It's going to be huge. But at least you know how much it will cost if you want to achieve. And then you go back to your budget. So this year, I'm going to budget this much. This year, I'm going to budget this much, etc., etc. Now, once you have the budget, once you have the cost, then you still need the money, right? So you can go to the basement and start printing, but I don't recommend this because that leads usually to a global fiscal crisis, right? So otherwise, what you do is that you look at how much growth tax revenues you have in the country. Then you look at also how much the private sector makes, how many jobs they create. Right? You go at your development partners, how much official development assistance they provide to Nepal. Right? It still represents 25 to 30% of the gross budget, so it's still a sizable amount of money. Right? You look at the remittances. I'm sure all of you has a family member who's working somewhere else. How much they send back every month or every semester. Right? So you add up all this, and that's your financing strategy. Right? So the government is working on a plan, on a budget, on a financing strategy, right, to deliver this big, big, big task. Right? But then, as we said earlier, the SDGs is not a government, it's a country responsibility. So who else is in the country? You have civil society, you have young people, you have the elderly. I'm not pointing at anyone. Show respect to your elders. Right? So you have many, many other groups like business sector also, right, contributing a lot to the SDGs. So you need to mobilize them. Right? And that's the other thing that we're trying to do as the UN. Right? We now have a civil society. I'm trying to get the words right. Maybe some help me if you can. Okay, that's one I know. We have the SDG Youth Alliance, the Youth Alliance for the SDGs. Right? So it's a group of youth organizations from across the country. I think there's close to 100 now that got together under this alliance with the SDGs in mind. And they run many, many projects, activities, and mobilize young people, etc. for this. We have a CSO forum for the SDGs. That's the one. Right? So because, as you can recognize, you have, for example, on climate or on life on land. Right? You have many NGOs. WWF, for example, is one of them. Right? They work in the field of environment. They spend money, they have budgets, they have programs, they have projects, they have staff. Right? So they do things that contribute to the SDGs. So again, you're trying to concentrate the efforts and to coordinate all the efforts of all the civil society organizations in Nepal, and there are thousands of them. Right? The third big pillar, and this is the one that we're still working on, is the business sector. That's a bit more difficult, because in the mindset of a big CEO, what he wants to do is make money. Right? So he has a hard time understanding why I have to care about all those things. So it's a bit more, it takes a bit longer term to explain that decent work is not only for him spending money on the quality of his employees, but if the employees are better paid, they have better working conditions, they will be more productive. If they are more productive, at the end of the day, he will earn more money. So you have to do a bit more of explanations. But what we ultimately want to do, and we've been talking with FNCCI, for example, on this, is to create a business coalition for the SDGs. Right? So what we try to do is that we take all the segments of society and we push them towards the SDG discussion. And we help them identify what it is that they can do to do that. Now, all of you, without knowing, are already SDG activists. Right? Because you study. By studying, you already are contributing to goal number 4. Right? Maybe you volunteer. Or even without that, when you go home, you have a brother and a sister smaller, you help him or her in her homework. You coach them. Right? That's a kind of volunteerism. By doing this, also, you invest your time in goal number 4, which ultimately will lead to goal number 8, because once you've studied, you'll have a job. Right? Now, if your job is, I understand a lot of you are in social science, right? So if your job leads towards a discussion on, let's say, better quality product, or product that are, the usual one that people like is, all those little toys for babies, right? They have to have security around them. You need to use a special paint because the baby is going to put the toy in the mouth, for example, right? This is called sustainable consumption, right? So that's goal number 12. Right? And I can go on and on and on. So what I would really like, and I'm going to close with this, what I really want to leave you with is, as much as you can, try to adopt this as your agenda. Right? As Nepali citizens, and obviously active and smart and clever, coming from a good background, otherwise you wouldn't be able to afford being here, this is your agenda. from now on. Right? Talk to other people about it. Convince them. If you want to join a bigger group so you're not alone, there's plenty of bigger groups. But this is, you won't get away with it because this is going to be at the core of a lot of the things that you will be doing for the next 13 years now. 2030 minus 2017. For the next 13 years. I will retire in 2033. I know. That's mandatory retirement in the UN, right? That means that basically everything that my career is going to be about now, last 3 years, I will just rest for the last 3 years, I guess, is going to be about that, right? So this is a major, major, major accomplishment as we created this concept and a major challenge to achieve them. But I am absolutely convinced that one, it's doable, and two, we will be much better off if this is achieved. Now it's question and answer, the part that I prefer. And you are allowed to disagree completely with me. The only thing you're not allowed to is throw things at me that I don't appreciate, right? But apart from that, please feel free.
I think you don't need 17 goals because if you're working in poverty, you're already working in health, education, agriculture. So it already covers several other goals. It's just that you put poverty like a separate, as it is like a separate entity. But when you are in poverty, you're already working in many areas because you know that they're interrelated, right?
Absolutely.
So then the number of goals becomes lesser. Number one. The number two is I think that the ownership will depend on the country, to country. Because some countries maybe they'll give more priority to poverty and less to climate change because they still haven't come to that level whereby climate change is important for them. For France, it might be more important. But for Nepal right now, food is more important than climate change, right? So that way, so maybe there'll be less emphasis. But for the government, they will have to address all this because it's a UN imposed thing. Because they've already agreed, right? And the government wants to be in the good books of UNDP and God knows what, right? So they are very, very quick at signing up all these treaties, and they don't realize that after they sign up,
they have to do something about it, yeah.
They don't have the money for that, right? But they want to be the good guy, say okay to everything, right? So I think this is a problem because then it becomes a burden. They again have to go begging for money to donor to donor. So Nepal ends up becoming a big begging bowl. And that hurts our pride. We don't want to be a beggar forever.
These are very good points. I agree with all of them except two. So let me start with the ones I don't agree with because they're always more interesting. They are not imposed by the UN. The UN is nothing else but the addition of 193 votes of countries. Right? So the UN as an entity doesn't impose anything to countries that don't want what it is that was decided. Nepal could have said, sorry, those 17, I'm sorry, I'm busy, I have to give food to Kailali people. Right? No, but as you say, and that's where I agree with you, there is always a beautiful incentive when you're in a group. You don't want to be pointed out as the one that's not agreeing with the others. So there's a kind of a gentleman's or gentlewoman's competition, right, where peer pressure becomes a positive factor. Right? So it's not imposed, but it's self-inflicted in that way.
Peer
right?
pressure is good, but not always.
I agree. The other point that I fundamentally disagree with, and that's it's sad that many people like yourselves think that, Nepal is not in a position to beg anything. Nepal sits on so much cash. The problem with Nepal is not the money, is not the availability of the money. The problem with Nepal is the incapacity to spend the money. Today, again, the newspapers are making big headlines out of this, that again, it is very forecasted that between now and the end of the fiscal year, the government will not have reached its development budget targets. It cannot spend year after year, and I have been here 3 years now, year after year, there's a budget surplus in Nepal. I agree it's more complicated than that, but then explain to me why the road from Narangang, I never can pronounce that, Muglin to, thank you, that famous road, which is the life road of Kathmandu Valley, why can it not be fixed? Why are we in a position where every 3 days there's a landslide? The country can make beautiful roads up in Ilam, beautiful, gorgeous roads. Same topography than that road, but that road cannot be fixed. That road, even from Kalanki to Tangkot, cannot be fixed. That is unacceptable, totally unacceptable. And it's not a question of money, we all know that. And I agree with you, it's more complex than that, right? But if you want it, you can do it. but I think you, otherwise you raise two very important points, which I haven't touched on. One is the interrelation of all the goals, right? This is 17 separate goals, but as you rightly say, you cannot achieve one without looking at the others. They are all very much interrelated, right? And the other thing that you said, which is very important, which I haven't touched on, is the localization of the goals, right? And you're absolutely correct. You can only come up with a common agenda at the level of 193 countries if you allow the countries some flexibility to say, you know what, for Nepal, 11, 6, 7 are important. The rest, secondary. And each country is going to have a different set, right? Because each country is at a different position. And each country wants to, you know, satisfy its people in a different way. So this is very much acknowledged, and not only between countries, but within countries. CASCI has a completely different agenda than Subtari, right? Different levels of development, different levels of people, different levels of everything. Right? So even within countries, that's why it's very important that we push the SDGs at the local level. People will have a different take on it. And that is provided within the structure.
How did it come from MDG to SDG?
How did it become?
Millennium Development Goals has been transformed into Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
And I have a problem with the word sustainable.
Okay.
And what is the definition that's being used to call it Sustainable Development Goals? And how can it be sustainable when nothing is sustainable on there anyway?
Our lives is not sustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything has an end. It can't go on forever.
No.
So sustainable means it continues by itself in simple terms.
Mm-hmm.
But then you could define it according to your own convenience, right?
I agree with you. I mean, you know, you can call whatever, but
I like the word Millennium Development Goals.
well, millennium is because it was developed in 2000. That's all.
My basic
Right?
thing or argument I'm trying to make is setting goals is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because if you set goals, then you know where you want to reach a certain point. If you don't set goals, then you never get anywhere.
I agree.
So that was a positive. For me, that was a positive thing that we started setting goals. You know, so people start then working towards that goal. You know, otherwise, if there's no goal, then there's nothing to work towards. You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
just do it whenever you feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Yes, please.
My question is like, the goals of SDG, like 17 goals, are set according to the priority or with the ripple effect, or just randomly put it? First question. Second question, like, there are 193 members in UN, so while setting the SDG goal, is representative from all the nations while setting this SDG?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I guess the first question is, I mean, it's a bit like what we were saying, they're all interdependent, right? You cannot, like the sir previously was saying, want to reduce poverty if you still have hunger, right? Or you could technically, but it wouldn't mean anything for the people, really, right? Because you can be very rich, but if you're not giving food, then you're really not sustainable, right? So they're not put randomly, right? Because what the nations have tried to do is to come up with an agenda that starts to look at a holistic approach of what it takes for people to fundamentally have, one, their rights fulfilled, which theoretically should lead towards their happiness, right? It's improved quality of life, if you want. Oh, yeah. I mean, what you see 1 to 6 is the unfinished business of the MDGs, right? And then 7 to 17 are the other issues, which at the time in 2000, those experts that I was referring to did not think that it would be possible for countries to agree. But 15 years later, because the world has, changed fundamentally, we were able to push the agenda further, right? And sometimes with provocation. But countries have learned from what has happened in the last 15 years. People today are individuals, citizens around the world are better informed, they have stronger voices, they have more courage in standing up and saying what they want. Look at the Arab Spring movement, for example, right? In hardcore totalitarian regimes within Muslim conservative societies, right? the young people especially came up, the women came up and said, enough is enough. We want to have a voice in what is going to be decided for us. Right? So there was this general philosophy and this sense, you feel it. It's, how do you say it in English? The smell of the day, that thing that you feel around you, this energy in societies that was much more ambitious and positive than in 2000. Right? So they came up with the next 17, which again, one could have argued that it's going to be very difficult, but they were successful. Right? Now, the representativity is one of the beauty of this, because the MDGs, as much as I think everybody at the end agreed with them, were not at all conceived in a democratic way, if you wish. They were experts locked up in a room that came up with them. Right? Now, they happen to be acceptable to all because, again, these are issues that are important to everyone. These are very, very representative. That's why I have no issue asking you to take ownership of them, because maybe not you, but your neighbor, your cousin, your father went on the My World survey and said, I want this, 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 and that, in that order of priority for me as a Nepali. Right? And when you put all those votes together, you end up with that. Right? And we couldn't, I'm sure we can come up with 49 of them. But who will ever remember 49? 17, I'm getting old, but I can remember them, but it's a struggle already. Right? So you also want to condense what you were saying. Right? You want to have as few as possible, because then it's easier as a package for people to kind of relate to and remember. 17 requires a bit of exercise. Other questions, comments, disagreements?
You can drop one every year.
I wish. Only if it's achieved. Only if it's achieved.
I just told that we learned about just that due to the failure of the disease, this disease strike from 2016, it has been implemented up to 2030. So would you say something about that during your letter?
Sure. When I said that the MDGs were achieved, I was not lying, but simplifying the statement, right? Because if you look at it, statistics, and I guess you all study statistics one way or another, right? You can play with numbers, right? So if you aggregate to the level of the world, well, you can say that poverty has been reduced by half in 15 years. Why? Because just China did it. And China is 1-point-something billion people, right? So if they've done it, well, a small nation of 5,000 people like Tuvalu or something, it doesn't really matter if they don't do it, because statistically, the Chinese have done it for them. Right? Now you bring this down at the level of Nepal. Some districts have managed to be much more successful than other districts. So again, when you aggregate at the national level, you can say that Nepal has achieved goals 1, 2, 3, whatever. Right? And I think of the MDGs, Nepal has achieved probably, except 2, I think they did not make it statistically. Right? But then other districts will say, no, we did it. Yes, at the level of districts, you did it. Right? But again, not everybody is equal from the start. Right? So will we achieve 17 goals by 2030? I will tell you when we get there. Right? But what I can tell you is that they are doable. Right? We've costed, a rough estimate, don't ask me the number, I don't know, it's in trillions of dollars, right? But it was costed. Money is available. You just, for the moment they're being spent in firing people somewhere in Syria, for example. Right? Military spending, we only need a small percentage of that, and if you put it to this, it's a piece of cake. Right? But it doesn't only require money, it requires will, political will. Right? And political will at the global level, not only at the national level. Like a goal like, life below water. And for Nepal, it's, as a landlocked country, you relate less to this issue, right? But the importance of the oceans is critical. We just had the ocean conference in New York a few weeks back. Right? And we saw that countries, have very different agendas on the speed at which we utilize the resources that the ocean gives us. And that's an issue of sustainability.
We have very little political will now.
Well, I'm not Nepali, so I cannot say that, but yeah. For example, yeah. No, absolutely, that's a big issue. The big question is like, when Trump announced that he was withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, immediately people said that jeopardizes the SDGs. right? But then the next day, the European countries said, don't worry, we will compensate. So again, no, it's a trade-off, right? Now, if Russia, China, Trump, I don't want to say the US because I feel sad for the Americans, but Trump, you know, and let's say Brazil, you know, the big industry of the world say, oh, we withdraw, you know, then we can cross over 13 for sure. But for the moment, it's only Trump, and I think it will only be Trump, so. Exactly. See, that's peer pressure. The positive aspect of peer pressure. China is using.
They've reached that level where climate change is important.
Yeah. Oh yeah, very much so. These are the 17 goals and the 169 targets. So you can put this under your pillow and you wake up the next morning, magic, you know them by heart. I tried, it works. So I have a basket full of them here. Feel free to take one and use it to continue promoting the good message. Thank you very much.